to learn more about the Heart Fellowship Program. It is really I would say one of the most exciting parts of the Heart Leadership Program, if not the most exciting part, because it speaks to the aspirations of the entire program. And hey, there is some, well, good to see Louisa. Oh my gosh. Um, and we are just delighted that you're here, that you're interested in learning about this really terrific fellowship. We we know that it's one of a kind, and we are also really just glad that you're here to learn about it and also to learn from each other. I'm not going to spend much time. My name is Gunther Peck. I'm the director of the Heart Leadership Program. One of the great parts of my job is learning from students, but especially learning from the Heart Fellows as they do work that is just inspiring, Herculean, and learning all the time as they do it. And what we love about that as sort of their instigators, they're the real instigators. We learn from them, and that partnership is really, I think, what makes this such an exciting program. So I'm not going to talk more about it. I'm glad you're here. If there are questions, you're going to follow up with my fantastic colleagues, the Associate Director, Lalita Kalagatla, who's going to be leading this orientation, and Ana Ramirez, our Associate in Research. So I will just turn it over to them but say, I'm so glad to see you. I see some familiar faces and really glad you're here. And then also look forward to meeting the others. And I would ask those of you, not to put you on the spot, we would love to see your faces. So for those who are, I know the new Zoom normal, it's kind of fun to be not really there. But when we do the Q&A, we would love to see you. So please join us. And I'll hand it over to Lalita.
Thank you so much, Gunther. And we are so thrilled to see all of you. As Gunther said, the Heart Fellowship Program is an incredible program. And we have two of our former fellows here joining us today. I figured rather than us sharing our perspectives on what the program is, and we'll do a little bit of that, I'll sort of give you all an overview of the program and the structure and those sorts of logistical factors. But I figured the best people to speak about the program would be the former fellows themselves. So two of them were kind enough to join us today, and I'll introduce each of them in just a moment. But before turning it to them, to Louisa and Elizabeth, who are here today, I would love for Ana Ramirez, who's our associate in research, to introduce herself as well.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Ana. Like Gunther and Alita said, I'm the associate in research with the Heart Leadership Program. Really excited about this fellows program. It's really great, and I'm glad that y'all made the time to be here. Just for the structure of this, we'll be having a Q&A at the end. So let's save our questions to the end, and then you could either use a raise hand feature or send me a question privately if you prefer or are more comfortable doing that. Otherwise, between now and when the application is due, and we'll talk about that, I'm free through email. You can go ahead and send me any questions you have about that as well. So I'll hand it over back to Lalita.
Thank you, Ana. So without any further ado, I would love to first introduce Elizabeth Nolan, who is a recent Duke grad and a former Hart Fellow. And Elizabeth spent her time as a Hart Fellow in Tanzania, had an incredibly exciting and unusual and challenging at times fellowship experience. So I'd love for Elizabeth to introduce herself and share her fellowship experience with you all. Elizabeth, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Like Lalita said, my name is Elizabeth. I graduated Duke in the class of 2019. So I got back from my fellowship in March, around when COVID-19 hit. So I came back a little early, unfortunately, but it was still a good about 8 months that I had there, which was awesome. My fellowship was in Tanzania. I was with an NGO in rural Tanzania called Tanzania People and Wildlife, and they were focused on human wildlife conflict mitigation. And I spent a lot of my time working with their monitoring and evaluation team, tracking sightings of big cats and African wild dogs, and also doing a lot of work with spatial ecology using camera trap monitoring. My project for my Heart Fellowship research project, community-based research project, evolved throughout the time of my fellowship, depending on the needs of my community partner. They shifted a little bit while I was there, so I had to develop my project a little bit differently. And I ended up doing or working towards doing a project on the perceptions of empowerment among women doing their beekeeping initiative, which was a sustainable enterprise initiative. So I was talking to mamas in the village to see how empowered they were and their perceptions of empowerment. Yeah, so that was my project.
Sorry, muted. Thank you, Elizabeth. And if there are, Elizabeth and Louisa will stay with us for a bit. So if any of you have any specific questions for them, they'd be happy to answer them. But let me turn it over to Louisa. Louisa is here with us from Brazil, and while she's in medical school at Cornell, she's taking classes remotely, like most of us at this point. But Louisa, would you share a little bit about your fellowship experience as well?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to be able to share a little bit of some of the experience I've had over the past year with you guys, and maybe get all of you very excited to apply to the Heart Fellowship. So I came to Brazil for my fellowship, and it was wonderful because I got to come to my home country, and it was a place that I'm super passionate about and that I hope to continue to engage with for the rest of my life. So to me, it didn't really make sense to try to venture myself out into any other place than my own home country. And so I came back to Brazil, where I had grown up, and to a different city though, but still being able to speak my own language and interact with people that shared my same culture was very incredible. And I worked with a clinic or a hospital doing some cervical cancer related research. And I was working very closely with a faculty member at Duke and a new device that's been developed at Duke that allows women to do a self-visualization of their cervix and kind of bring a little bit of the self-exam and empowerment idea into cervical cancer screening. And then primarily looking to expand that into rural areas. I was working with a team that did gynecological oncology. And so it was also incredible for me because as an aspiring medical student at the time, I got to have a lot of clinical exposure while also developing my research project. I really contributed a lot to their research activities I also contributed a lot to the research activities of the team, and it was just a very wonderful experience. Yeah, and I'm happy to answer any questions. If anyone else wants to reach out to me also later on, I'm also happy to talk.
Thank you so much, Louisa. And with that, what I will do is sort of, I have slides that I could share, but instead what I thought I would do is just kind of give you some basic nuts and bolts. Most of the information is available and accessible via our website about the program itself and the structure. But I just sort of want to go over a few things, and then we'll open it up for questions. Since it's such a small group, we figured it's best done conversationally. So let me, like you heard from both Louisa and Elizabeth, this is a 10-month, the Heart Fellowship is a 10-month immersive experience. It's an immersive leadership development experience, essentially. And the key components of the fellowship are direct service, community-based research, critical reflection, and overall leadership development. And the idea is for each of you, like you heard from Elizabeth and Louisa, both the projects that they worked on were both very different, spoke to their aspirations and their passions. And that's the idea of this fellowship, that, each of our fellows does work that speaks to their passions and aspirations, and something that they continue beyond their fellowship. So that's something we emphasize on throughout much of our programming at the Heart Leadership Program, that you work on an issue or a cause that you believe in, and it sort of becomes, a longer term avocation, if you will. What do we mean by direct service? Essentially, you're working with a community partner who you develop a relationship with, and we're happy to brainstorm ideas on, on that specifically with you, on how to find a community partner and, approach them with your idea and so on and so forth. But essentially, you're leading that process, and part of your time is spent in providing direct service to your community partner. So you're part of their organization, helping them do their day-to-day business, but you also have the independence of having your own funding. And so you have the independence to do your community-based research that speaks to both your aspirations as well as something that's relevant and meaningful for the community partner and the community itself, not something where you're flying in, doing your research and then moving out of there. The idea is for this to be relevant and meaningful for the community partner and the community as well. A couple other things that, as far as the structure goes, is a huge benefit to this program is the critical reflection that you do throughout the fellowship. So we structure it through a range of activities. One, you write what we call letters home, or letters to us, reflecting on some aspect of your experience as a fellow. And we don't sort of structure that too much. You have latitude in what you choose to write about, but the idea is to sort of reflect about some issue that you're encountering, and think about what the meaning of that experience is, both for your work in the moment, as well as for your longer term development as a leader and as a professional working in this space. And we have a writing coach who guides you through this process of reflective writing. So it's not that you're writing letters and it's going into a black box where you're not getting any responses back. Our writing coach, Suzanne Katzenstein, writes back detailed, thoughtful responses. I occasionally write shorter responses, but Suzanne is amazing, and she guides you through the process of critical reflection by asking you questions and helping you probe deeper. So that's a huge benefit to this fellowship, very much different than pretty much any other fellowship, similar fellowship opportunity available out there. And then a couple of things related to the funding and the support related to this fellowship. This essentially is an all-paid fellowship. By that, I don't mean that it's, let me just put it this way, and Louisa and Elizabeth, I'm sure, will agree with me on this. This is not, you don't apply for a Heart Fellowship for the money. It's for sure. It's more driven by passion and your aspiration. But so we essentially give you support for the entire year. We support your housing, cost of living, where possible. We provide health insurance coverage, travel, if you're traveling to an overseas location, we cover visa and resident permits and things like that, costs of immunization. We have some modest funding for language training and other research-related expenses where necessary. So these are some aspects of the funding that comes along with this fellowship. You have the capacity to be independent, but let's just say that this isn't a position that will help you save money. That's not so if you're interested in that, that's not something that this fellowship can facilitate. And then one quick, I just wanted to let you all know about the deadlines and the application process itself. So there's two major parts to the selection process. One is, the first one is you submit the application, and the components of the application are a fellowship proposal and then giving us an introduction to who you are. So one major component is you talk about what the work you want to do, and then the other component is who you are and why that work speaks to you. And a part of the fellowship proposal is that we ask you to develop an exploratory relationship with your community partner and have some initial conversations without committing to anything, obviously, at this early stage. But while that's not set in stone, it's highly beneficial to have some sort of an initial idea about the community partner you'll be working with. And then the other part of the application is telling us a little bit of who you are, some of the work that you've done as a student so far, and why you're best positioned to tackle this new project that you're about to embark on. Also, as part of the application process, we ask you to send us your resume, transcript, a letter of recommendation, and names of 2 references. And all of these are due by February 12th, which is the second Friday in February. Between now and then, if any of you have additional questions after today, you know where to reach Anna and me, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have. So with that, I just sort of want to open it up so that you have a chance to ask some questions, or if you'd like additional information about something specific, we can spend time talking about that. So open it up to questions at this point.
Yeah, feel free to raise your hand and I'll call on you. Esperanza?
Yeah, my question was, thank you for the presentation. My question was, what does the exploratory relationship with the community, like a potential community partner, look like? And any suggestions for how to get started on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And Louisa and Elizabeth, if you have any specific suggestions on how y'all went through this process, that might be good to share here as well. But what I will say quickly is that, I'm sure over the course of your time at Duke, you've worked on a variety of projects with various community-based organizations, either here or elsewhere in the United States or overseas. Has anybody here not had any sort of experience, community engaged work experience? I assume not, but so the idea is for you either to be in conversation with someone you worked with in the past that you would like to further develop a relationship with and work with them for an additional year, or find an organization that is different than one you worked with in the past, and have a conversation with them about ways in which you can collaborate with them on, projects that you could work with in collaboration with them that are in line with your interests as well as their needs. Elizabeth and Louisa, if either of you have anything else to add in terms of what y'all did, that would be great to do so here too.
Yeah, I can say that for me, I did not have a community partner in mind when I initially started the process of coming up with my research project, but I had a mentor in mind who I had worked with in the past, and they had done work and worked with organizations themselves that I knew were doing work that was similar to work that I enjoyed and work that I had done with my mentor, just not with a particular organization in mind. So I really was relying on my mentor and the organizations that he had worked with in the past and sent students with in the past as guidance and as to where I should work and who would be a good community partner.
I think I had a little bit of a different experience from Elizabeth, although I must say that both of us did have like some changes in our community partners along the way. So I think if that makes you feel a little bit better, it's not set in stone at all. I arrived in Brazil with a community partner with whom I had a great relationship. Maybe a month and a half later, it was a government agency that got defunded and shut down. And here I was in Sao Paulo without a community partner for a bit. It didn't take very long for me to find another one. They luckily directed me somewhere. But I think that it's not a linear path, and it's all about building a relationship at the end of the day. And so I think that's something that worked really well for me, is that I didn't come in with a piece of paper that said, listen, this is my proposal. I had an idea of what I wanted to do, but I really wanted to get the answer from them. And I think that with my project specifically, I had all of these hopes and dreams for everything that I can do with the cervical cancer screening device in another country, and like aspirations as big as like, what if I present this to the government and they like it? And I think that talking to people, I realized that I needed to kind of prove that there was a need for us to rethink the way that cervical cancer screening was done. And so I kind of had to take a few steps back and be like, wait, and I heard a lot from physicians that women did not want to do a self-exam, that women were not ready for it, that women really liked going to her male provider who took care of her really with a lot of effort and warmth. And then I was like, wait, let me just turn to these women and ask what's going through their minds. And I think that was like kind of where I found a window that I could bring something in that was interesting to my community partners, which was something that they didn't have the bandwidth to do. I also try to do something that would give them data that went beyond just my work. I think I try to bring in data that they could analyze and that could improve the type of care that they were delivering to their patients by better knowing who their patients are. And so I think that kind of trying to balance all of these incentives and these interests is really important. And again, just like being very humble and coming in to learn and to listen is really the key. And also being flexible to knowing that things might change and that it's okay, and that all of us had very different experiences, but all of them were so unique and so special.
Yeah, I would re-emphasize that the partner that I wrote about in my proposal was not my partner for very long, because that relationship was again exploratory and was not solidified, and that organization ended up going through an extreme typhoon that basically wiped out the entire area. So they did not have the capacity to hold a fellow at the time. So I didn't solidify a relationship with a fellow until after the Heart Fellowship retreat, which was after I'd already graduated. So it was, not an ideal situation, and hopefully you can find someone that sooner than that. But it is definitely a very flexible process and evolves throughout. And so everyone will have a different experience. So while put a lot of thought and effort into your proposal and who you would like to work with, just know that you have to be flexible just in case things change.
Absolutely. And that's exactly, each person's journey is different. Each Heart Fellow's experience is different. And, while we encourage you to have some exploratory ideas on what you would like to work on, and perhaps even a community partner that you would like to work with, but know that it's possible and fairly likely, if past will precedent, that this happens all the time to our Hart Fellows, where they have to pivot to different organizations, or even change the focus of their projects along the way sometimes.
If I could add just one thing, is that when you're accepted as a Hart Fellow, you're not just accepted. It's not just your proposal that's being accepted. They're accepting you as a person, and they're investing in you as a leader. And so if there are hiccups along the way, they understand that's part of it, and that it's like a whole team that's there to support you. If you think about it, there are like 3 faculty members, there's a research associate, there's also Beth, who's incredible, and they're like, my year there were 5 Hart Fellows, and it's almost like one person per fellow to support you, and you have just this whole team that's there to make things happen. And so I think that if you think about it more, and like, don't hold too strongly to the proposal that you wrote, like just make sure that your passion comes through, I think is the most, and show obviously that you've thought it through, is the most important thing.
Looks like we have other questions as well.
Yeah, let's go with Autumn.
Hi, thank you so much. And I apologize that I am not currently able to turn on my video, but thank you so much for coming to talk with us. This is more of a logistical question about the application. If we apply to the Hart Fellowship, do we have to have a set committal before whether or not we know that we were accepted? Or if we are looking at the Hart Fellowship and also other opportunities, will we be able to do so?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and of course you should absolutely pursue every and all opportunities that you think best match your interests and aspirations. That being said, this is a highly competitive fellowship, and we select a set number of Hart Fellows after a rigorous application and interview process. We almost always, that coming down to the choice of anywhere from 2 to 5 Hart Fellows is extraordinarily difficult. And I know Gunther can vouch for this as well, that, when we come down to the last 10 or 15, we really struggle with, getting to our final list. So in the interest of fairness for everybody, we give you a time frame by which we expect you to make your decision. And if you would like to move on to other opportunities, you absolutely have the right to do so. So I hope that answers your question, Autumn.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Of course.
Great. Next, we have a question from Morgan.
Hi, everybody. Thank you again so much for being here and telling us about this experience. My first question is a general one, is just, are all of the projects supposed to be abroad or international, or some domestic as well?
I was going to say, yeah. So actually, we've experimented since I became director of the Hart Leadership Program. So 2 years ago, we accepted our first domestic Hart Fellowship, or Hart Fellow. And because prior to that, it had been almost exclusively global and obviously humanitarian in focus. So part of what we are interested in is, in some ways, I think the realization, long overdue, that there's plenty of really powerful leadership development and need in North America as well. So we have, and in this current, we have 2 fellows this year, and one is in the United States and one is in Mexico. So we are, we're not excluding that. There's no preference one or the other. So I wanted to say one other thing about Elizabeth and Louisa, that maybe it seems after the fact they're so, and you were already incredibly impressive, and how hard it is to choose. I agree. There are many wonderful people who don't become Hart Fellows. But one thing that really does stand out is, I would say, something like, it's hard to even know this up front, but it's a kind of adaptability or ability to improvise that you almost can't see in advance. But I mean, just thinking about what Elizabeth had to rethink in her fellowship really exemplifies, and Louisa. I mean, within the first 2 months, all the planning was sort of, everything went sideways. We don't expect that. We don't wish that on anybody, but that is life. And part of what you want to do is you think about your application. Obviously, we're looking for a coherent application, but we're really wanting you to speak to the kind of, I would say, the emotional honesty, the core values you have, and what excites you about what is also an unknown. So, and I think that that's really that's the spirit of what you should aspire for. This is an aspirational fellowship. It's not simply pre-professional. That said, many of the people, you should think of the process of applying as its own process that has value and reward. And I reconnected with someone who applied for a Hart Fellowship, almost got it, didn't get it, but it led her to a fantastic fellowship, and she's back. And the process of applying for this thing helped her figure out what she wanted to do. And so, if in the real world, in the ideal world, every one of you would apply, and we'd give fellowships to every one of you, but the process itself is a discernment process that is to your benefit, to lean into the thing you think you want to do, and also to be candid and honest about, how would I do this? And the other point I wanted to make, you're kind of working with a community partner that may not be your community partner, Esperanza. It's a scary process. But if you already know them, that's great. But the opportunity is to try to figure out by doing. You're learning by doing throughout the Hart Fellowship, and as soon as you begin your application. So the more you do, the more you're going to learn about what you want to do. So that is the opportunity for every one of you who's applying. And the hard work is on us is to choose who gets it. But it's a good process. So, and I've talked too much, sorry.
Yeah, and I guess I'll go ahead and ask my second question real quick. This one specifically for Louisa. I think the project you're talking about the Coloscope. Is that the device you're thinking? Yes. So I work on the Pocket Colposcope sister project. So I was just curious about how the dynamic works between the Duke organization, that came up with the device and everything, and then your community partner. Were those two things already linked, or did you help link them? And what was that dynamic like as you were working?
So I linked them. And I think it's actually really incredible that you brought this up, because I had incredible support from my faculty advisor, who's Dr. Nimi Ramanujam, while doing this project. And because I was working with a device that had been created in her lab, I kind of relied on having a little bit of guidance there. I'm no engineer. I knew nothing about the device. I was just the excited person on the ground with aspiring clinical experience to kind of make things work. So I really relied on that, and I needed it, and I really did get it. So I think that one thing that is, for me, very rewarding is that I was able to establish this collaboration between her group and then the group that I was working with here. And it's something that now we kind of have been able to build a team that is continuing to work on this project. And I hope that that is something that will stand on its own even after I'm gone. So I'm still involved. And I think this is something relevant to bring up. I'm still involved in the project that I started. And I don't think that I'm gonna take my hands off of it anytime soon. And it's also been really great to be in Brazil for my first year of medical school, because I've still been able to be a little bit closer to the project than I would be if I were in the US. And I've been able to recruit students here, students in the US from Duke and not, who've been helping me. And also opportunity, if anyone is interested, we need plenty of help. So I think that it's been really great also to see how my faculty advisor kind of gave me just like a free way for me to do whatever I wanted with the device and to explore whatever I wanted and whatever made sense to my community partner. And I think that having that aligned with her from the very beginning was really important for me to make sure that I was fulfilling the goals that I set for myself for the partnership, and along with the values of the fellowship, and being able to do a project that was actually sustainable. And I think that it's been proving itself to be really sustainable. And it's a project that's gotten traction in the place that I spent my fellowship working at, and my community partner. And they actually want to keep doing it after I leave, or after I leave to the US. I've technically left.
Thank you, Louisa. And Elizabeth, one thing that I was wondering if you could sort of speak to on as well is the relationship with the faculty mentor, and how that shaped your work, also helped you find other, pivot to a different project and find a different community partner when the need arose. So I don't know if you want to chime in here.
I will. Thank you. So my faculty mentor, as I mentioned earlier, was my connection to my community partner previously. So I had not worked with my community partner before. And when I came in with an idea of a project that, we had discussed prior to me, going to Tanzania. But when I arrived, they had done a lot of work on that type of project before. And so they had other needs that, shifted what I would be working on. And those needs were not my area of expertise, and especially were not the area of expertise of my faculty mentor. So that made it a little difficult for not only for that relationship to be used as heavily in terms of just the work that was being done and the skills that were necessary to do that work, but also just in terms of, it was just not necessary, to be completely honest, it was not necessarily a project my faculty mentor was very interested in. I went from, dealing with big cats and charismatic megafauna to dealing with beekeeping and women's empowerment, which were very different projects. And while I was, obviously very still passionate about women's empowerment, it was not necessarily the thing that my faculty mentor was very interested in. And, that was just, again, another challenge to deal with and another thing to be flexible with. I had plenty of those during my time in Tanzania, but I really had to adjust and learn that you can find mentors all over the place, and you can find mentors within your community partner. And so there are definitely some older people that I worked with who, honestly were better mentors than I could have ever asked for, because they were from that community and were experienced in these topics and spoke the languages that I didn't know how to speak to tribes people. And so, you have to be flexible in terms of definitely where you seek support when you're doing your project. And it might not necessarily be the faculty mentor that you came in with, or, the head of your community partner organization. My community partner co-founders were extremely busy people. And, it was a very small organization, and they didn't necessarily have the time to dedicate to really building that strong relationship. And so I really had to find coworkers and people who were heading up the departments that I was helping in to be my point of contact with my community organization. So it's definitely, you have to be, creative with who you're going to communicate directly and have that really close relationship, so that you can have that community based research. So that doesn't necessarily mean the head of the organization or anything like that. It can be really just, the mama in the village who is really passionate about women's empowerment, or it can be, the guy in the office who has really been thinking on these issues for a long time and is really happy to have somebody who, has the funding and the time to be able to explore them even more. So definitely be open-minded to who you're going to be seeking support from and helping when you're doing your project.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Louisa. So I think the three things that I would like to emphasize there from what both Louisa and Elizabeth shared is that each Hart Fellowship experience is unique. One, that's the one thing. Clearly, you see that from both the work that each of them did as Hart Fellows, but also in how their journeys unfolded. Right, they're very different. And the second part to that, I think both Louisa and Elizabeth emphasized multiple times, is the need for flexibility, right? It's good to have a plan, but sometimes plans don't work as we intend for them to work. And so, the willingness and the ability to sort of, think on your feet, be able to find other partnerships and develop relationships that will sort of take you through to your ultimate goal of, doing the work that you care most deeply about. Those two things I would emphasize. And the third thing I will also tell you is, throughout all of this, one thing that Louisa alluded to earlier is our team here our team here at the Heart Leadership Program is here to support you and be there with you throughout this whole process. Now, we can't obviously be on the ground with you, but we will support you throughout this process. Once you're selected as a Heart Fellow, we have your back, and we'll be there with you for the entire duration of your fellowship experience, helping you work through whatever you are encountering. I think we had one more. Yeah, Brian had a question.
Yeah, thank you all again for coming and for giving us the opportunity to ask questions. Well, you guys have sort of gotten at this already, but I wanted to ask specifically, is our intention to be as specific as possible in the proposal, like to try to iron out, a specific community organization and the work that we're going to be doing specifically? And along those lines, since it is, advertised as a research fellowship, is like our main goal strictly to come out with research answers, or is there also like, some other type of work involved, which Elizabeth sort of got at that as well, that she changed the work that she was doing, but I'm wondering if it was still research, or is there capacity for other types of jobs?
So that's a great question. The Heart Fellowship experience is actually a combination of three things: service, research, and critical reflection. Not in any particular order necessarily, but you're doing all three. So the idea is not just to be, super research focused and, be in this experience for research purposes. That's not the intent of the fellowship. The idea is for you to be on the ground, to provide service to your community partner, but also have the ability and the freedom to do a community-based research project that speaks to your aspirations as well as to needs that exist on the ground in the field wherever you are. So I think it really is a combination of both of those, and we don't emphasize one over the other necessarily. We do ask, however, that you work towards some sort of a final deliverable that results from the work that you do as a Heart Fellow. And that's taken a myriad shapes based on the context. And you have flexibility in determining what that is, and you do that in collaboration with your community partner. Does that answer your question, Brian?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
I would also chime in and say, I think it's up to, at the beginning of your fellowship, you have a kind of a form that with questions where you discuss with your community partner and establish, what are your day-to-day activities that you're going to do, and, just try to put that relationship on paper a little bit and tease it out early on, so you know how much time you want to dedicate to doing your project versus doing daily work at the organization, whatever that may be. And for me, a lot of my work at the beginning was day-to-day work, and it was because I was teasing out this research project and it was changing, and it was hard to schedule meetings to develop this project with my community partner. So I did a lot of work that was in the office, either doing, spatial mapping with ArcGIS, or I was doing camera trap work. So it was varying depending on what was needed at the time. And my project, got pushed back far enough and had a lot of delays in terms of the the Tanzanian government approving it because it needed research approval. And so unfortunately, I didn't get extremely far into the actual, doing my research project. I had the proposal and everything ready, and then I shared that proposal with my community partner once I had to leave early because of COVID. But that meant that my final deliverables had to change, and that changed to developing a camera trap protocol that they still use now, so that the new people who come in understand how to run that in a more efficient and meaningful way in doing camera trap studies. And it, came in the form of creating different maps that they needed or things like that. So sometimes it, changes depending on it, depending on what happens with your project or whatnot. But I would say that, research is an important component, but I found, to me, honestly, the most meaningful work was the day-to-day operations. And I think that was the most meaningful for me, but also the most helpful to my community partner at times, especially since the project was shifting, and that proves that sometimes the project you want isn't the project that's the most helpful to your partner. So that means at the beginning, you really have to put in the work to make sure that you're developing a project that's useful for your partner, but also meaningful for you. But it also means that sometimes you find you do a project that is useful to them, and maybe it's not necessarily as meaningful to you, so it changes. And you have to find that, the thing that you're really passionate about in that day-to-day work. And that, for me, the day-to-day work is the stuff that now I'm going and doing in future professions and research for myself. So it really just depends, and finding that balance between how much time you give to doing your research and to doing that, the daily activities.
I couldn't agree more. I think each person is going to have a completely different experience, and it's really up to you to figure out with your community partner how you want to balance your time between research and service. I also want to point out that it may change over time and in different time periods. I had time periods in which the clinic was so chaotic that I kind of had to come in as almost like an assistant, not that I was doing actual procedures on anyone, but I was just there as another person because it was very chaotic. And so I think that I also had periods of my fellowship in which I was heavily invested in my research, other periods in which I was doing more of the service side. And even if that meant just holding a patient's hand as they're going through some type of medical exam, for example, which was the setting that I was in. And I think Elizabeth also pointed out how the government of the country that you're at might need to approve your project. And I think that this might be something you want to consider from before you leave the US if you can. I know that obviously things are going to change along the way, but if you start thinking about how just figuring out what the IRB process looks on the ground, and if you do require IRB on ground, is really important, because at least for me, my project had to go through 3 different IRB committees in order to get approval. And so that just took a very long time. And I think at the end of the day, it didn't really, I did get to finish my project. And I think in part because I didn't leave the country during COVID, and I was able to kind of still be connected a little bit more to my project and to my work, even though I was doing it from home. But and then I think that also this year has come to show us that we need to be flexible, right? That things change all the time, and who would have ever expected that the 5 of us were each in a different place, exploring the world, and enjoying our fellowships, and then all of a sudden there's COVID pandemic and everyone's trying to figure out how they go back home. But I think that one thing that's been really great for me is that I was able to rethink and reflect with my community partner, how could we still continue our research even though we were in an online virtual setting now? And it was actually very incredible, because my research just reached so many more people than I had ever expected because I transitioned to a virtual format. So I think that also keeping in mind that, I originally expected to reach an interview and administer surveys to maybe like 120 women, and people were already telling me that I was being ambitious. Now we have a sample of over 10,000 people. And so I would have never expected that. And I think that I'm really grateful for the flexibility and also the partnership that I had built with my community partner, who, when everything became chaos, this physician who's a surgeon who was also crazy about his patients who have cancer and are specifically at risk for COVID sat down with me and were like, what are we going to do to figure this out? Like, I don't want you to leave without a project. And he knew that the research component of this was something that I was passionate about, and I had come with great excitement about the device that I was working on. So I think that, yeah, long story short, it's going to vary, and it's also not a linear path, and maybe that's the coolest thing about it.
Thank you both. That was really helpful.
Awesome. So on that note, if there are no more questions, we're, Anna and I are here to help you between now and when the application is due. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to one of us. If you sort of want to talk through, how to find a community partner, do y'all fund overseas fellowships versus fellowships here? Like Gunther said earlier, historically it's been that, for one reason or another, many of our fellows chose to go overseas, but we've also had fellows work here more so recently. So there's no requirement on where you should go or what you should do. Essentially, as long as there's a community engaged component to it, you have latitude in determining what you would like to work on for 10 months after graduation. And that's a really special thing. So I'll close on that note. Think about what you'd like to work on, what your aspirations are, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Anyone else? Before we close out? Okay, if not, then Louisa and Elizabeth, special shout out to both of you. Thank you. I greatly appreciate you both making the time. Thank you so much. And Gunther, I know it's a late evening. Thank you for making the time to join us. And
of course, no, this is it's a wonderful program, and proud to be seeing it evolve and learning from literally everyone who applies and everyone whose aspirations bring optimism to this moment. I do think in this election season, not to bring everything back to politics, but I'm reminded about the power of the work that Hart Fellows do, because it's the deeper, more important kind of challenges that are at the heart of all types of systemic challenges to the climate, to humanity, and those are before, during, and after an election season. And so I take heart from that. I know we're all looking to see what's going to happen on Tuesday, but really and truly, the deeper work that you do as a Hart Fellow is a gift after graduation to do this. This is the fellowship I wish existed when I graduated. I went abroad and floundered, candidly, and it was a productive floundering. But it would have been nice to have some structure and some support and witness. Really, that is what we do. We witness and we reflect and try to help you realize your ambitions and your aspirations, really. And they're going to change. So good luck. If you have questions, obviously we have terrific colleagues, and it's a team. So we want to hear from you. There's no dumb question either. And if you want to try out, would this be a good community partner? I mean, we can help you troubleshoot that. And I would also underscore one thing that Louisa and Elizabeth said. Begin maybe with a faculty mentor, someone who has connected. You don't have to invent a wheel by yourself. That's absurd. So you should build on the knowledge of other Hart Fellows. And last thing I was going to say, I just remembered, the Hart Fellows themselves are this amazing community. They've been here for 20 years. And they become a resource for each other. And I think it's an amazing cohort of people. And if you're interested in finding out about them, you can look at the previous Hart Fellows and what they've done to get a sense of the shape and the scale of what the program's about. So thank you, Lolita. And Hannah?
Yeah, so just to reiterate, all of that information on past Hart Fellows, the work that they did is all available on our website. So don't forget to go there and check it out. Thank you so much, you guys. And I'll hang out for a minute or two more if any of you have any additional questions, or you can also email me to find a different time if that's